Welcome to the Develop Yourself podcast, where we teach you everything you need to land your first job as a software developer by learning to develop yourself, your skills, your network, and more. I'm Brian, your host. I'm going to walk you through a 5-step process I use to solve coding problems, and there's a video in the show notes that you can follow along with as well if you're into that kind of thing, that shows me using this process in real time to solve and actually beat a problem on LeetCode. So, have you ever just stared at a coding problem until your eyes kind of glaze over? Your brain spins and your confidence drains and you just kind of give up, right? If you think what a software developer does, at the core function of the job, it's to solve problems with code, right? And your salary will typically grow at the rate that you can solve increasingly complex problems. A junior developer, for example, might solve a problem like, hey, fix the styling on this page, like use Tailwind and make the page look better, right? A mid-level developer, they'll figure out how to integrate a third-party library into an app. A senior might propose a plan to create a new feature for users or do some sort of update to a form component that people can use and leverage. The staff engineer might work with multiple teams on a multi-year plan to develop a custom tool for a customer service team. The CTO will think of like the general 5-year direction of the entire software team and the engineering department in order to service the business to increase revenue by 10%. So you're solving harder and harder problems that have increasingly large scale and impact, right? The impact of the junior developer is on a single page, right? That might affect a few customers. The impact of the CTO is on a company-wide scale, and it affects the revenue, the most important metric really for any business. And here's you trying to figure out how to write a function that finds the largest number in an array, and you can't do it. And that's okay, because we all start there, right? We all start in the same exact place. I remember struggling and bumbling through problems and just kind of going off memorization and thinking, okay, I just need to memorize all these different types of problems. And then when I see one, I'll just go in my memory bank and pull out the solution. And that's going to be how I get through interviews and all this kind of stuff. That doesn't work. That's the exact same reason why I've said a number of times, solving 500 problems on LeetCode will not make you pass a test or an exam or an interview or things like that. It could if you just go off complete rote memorization, but that's not a winning recipe for software. The lucky thing for you and I is that most software problems have been solved hundreds of times over. There's a pattern for it, but you need to have a pattern as well. And I'm just going to share the one that I use. I'm not saying this is right or is the best one. I'm just saying this is what I do. You should ultimately do what makes sense to you. So you can take my process, flip it, mix it, remix it, whatever you want to do, and see what makes sense, what doesn't, and then use it. But you can see me going through this in the video in the show notes as well to show you this is not like something I'm just pulling out of thin air or pulling out of my hat. This is something I actually use because it's really helped me over the years to at least start somewhere when I don't know what to do. Because most of the time you're looking at a problem, the reason it's a problem is because you don't know what to do, right? And when I work with people at Parsity, they're coming in, and this is one of the main issues or problems they have. They say, how do you just like solve problems, right? Like I get code, I get what an array is. I get how to write like some JavaScript syntax or Python syntax or whatever language you're using. But I don't get the part where you translate that into a solution. And how do I know that solution is even good, or whether it's like extensible or it's something that the industry or somebody that's a professional would say, yeah, that makes sense, right? So let's walk through this step-by-step process. Hey, I hope you're enjoying this episode, and I want to let you know that becoming a developer in 2025 is not going to look like becoming a developer in 2024. There is an overload of information, AI tools out there, so much conflicting social media BS that it's hard to understand what you really need to do. If you're interested in working with me and my partner Zubin in a very private, exclusive mentorship program where we teach you not just how to code, but how to reinvent yourself as a career changer and help you make a successful transition from your previous life into tech, we want to talk with you. This program is not easy, it is not short, but it is effective. If you want to schedule a talk directly with me or Zubin, just go to the show notes, parsity.io/inner-circle. Back to the show. Step 1, use your primary coding language, which is English, most likely. Or maybe it's whatever language you speak, right? Think of code as an implementation detail. So before you write a single line of code, rephrase the entire problem in the language that you probably know best, which I'm assuming is English if you're listening to this show. I don't want you to use coding specific terms at all. At this point, you just want to understand what's being asked so you can break the problem down even further. So for example, let's say you're attempting a leet code problem like to-sum. And by the way, why are you wasting your time on leet code? Unless you're going for the top 5, 10 companies out there, maybe don't spend a ton of time on leet code. So to-sum is a very common interview question where you're given an array of numbers and then a target number. And you need to find 2 numbers in this array that sum up to the target. So for example, let's say you have an array and you have the numbers 2, 4, 6, and 7 in there, and the target is 9. The function should return 2 and 7 because when you add 2 and 7, they equal 9, because math, right? To get clear on what you need to write, you should write out some sample inputs and expected outputs. So you should think, okay, do I really understand this problem? It seems really simple on the surface, right? What if you have an array with the numbers 1, 3, and 5, and you're trying to find the number 100? Well, will that work? What should you get at that point? You should ask this if the interviewer is a human, and if you're on LeetCode or some sort of site, you should just think, well, what should I do in this case? You should write some more inputs and outputs. Like, what if I have the numbers 1 and 2, and the output is 3? Well, I'd return 1 and 2. What if the output is, 10, and I have the numbers 1, 2, 7, and 3, 9? Well, I'd return 1 and 9. You should just keep doing these things so you have a very clear understanding, right? 1 to 3 examples, or at least 2 examples that kind of show you what you should be getting depending on what the input is. You might even write a comment like, I need to find a number that when added to the current number I'm looking at. So for example, if you see the number 1 and you have to have a target of 10, then what number must you find? Well, you'd have to find 9 because of math, right? Let's say your target was 5 and you're looking at the number 2. Well, what number do you have to find? 3. If you find it, you're done. The problem is solved. If you don't find it, you're not done and the problem is not solved. This should give you some hints as to what to do. So you should write out the positive case and the negative case. What happens when I find this number and I find this number? Well, I'm done. What happens if I find this number, but this other number doesn't exist? I'm not done. I need to keep looking. When have I exhausted all my possibilities? Well, if I'm at the end of the array and I haven't seen anything that matches or anything that sums up to this target, I know I'm done, right? I'm screwed. So that means I'm done with this problem. This should give you some hints as to what to write. This can take the longest amount of time, by the way. This part where you're not coding at all, where you're just talking and walking through the problem, is typically where you'll spend the most amount of time. This can be true in an interview as well. If you spend a lot of time really understanding the problem, the coding can be minutes long. It can be really, really quick in some cases because you've spent a lot of time getting up to the problem. So step 2, you want a sanity check. So you have something that resembles a set of instructions from step 1. Before you translate, before you do this translation step, do a sanity check. A sanity check basically means make sure you have made correct assumptions. Explain your code out loud to see if it makes sense. People used to do things called rubber ducking. Developers are kind of weird. They used to have literally rubber ducks on desks. Back when people worked in offices and that was the norm, you'd see developers have a little rubber duck and they'd explain things to the rubber duck. Why would they do this? I don't know. When there's humans around, you could just ask a human. But we did rubber ducks. It was a thing. I don't think it's still a thing, but it was a term called rubber ducking. Now you can rubber duck with your AI overlord. You can go on ChatGPT and say, hey, what do you think of this solution? Do not ask it for the answer because it will just give you the answer. And what fun is that? That won't teach you how to solve problems. That'll just teach you how to write stuff in ChatGPT and be a very good typist, right? So if you're a self-taught developer or you just don't have a human in reach, or maybe you're in some sort of coding school or something like that, and you don't have a human in arm's reach, you can use AI tools to do this. Again, no code at this point. You just want to see, hey, does this make sense? Am I on the right track? If you're in an interview, you absolutely want to ask the interviewer and say, hey, does this make sense to you? What do you think about this solution so far? I think I'm ready to code it up. That can give you some really good insight. And also you can look at their body language and see, am I on the right track? Am I on the wrong track here? Now, finally, we're going to code. So you know what you need to do at this point, most likely. but you probably don't know how to code it. The earlier you are in your career, the more likely it is that you just don't know what to code exactly. So start with what you do know. If you see an array, you can assume I'm probably going to have to iterate over that array. That's a really safe assumption. Anytime you see an array, you can pretty safely write out a for loop for that array or however you want to iterate over it and think, yeah, I probably got to do something where I'm looking at every item in the array. Because what else can you really do with arrays besides iterate over them and look at all the items in them? So when you don't know what to do the thing you know, right? And then you can look up the rest if you really need to. And you've done the heavy lifting at this point, what I consider the most difficult part, which is understanding the problem and then actually figuring out a way to approach it. Writing code can be the shortest piece of this puzzle. Like I said, it's an implementation detail. And this is the reason why the CTO at a company can lead a massive tech organization without knowing how to write React code. Right? Being the most senior person in an organization isn't about who can write specific language syntax the best or something. That's a losing game, in my opinion. It's important earlier in your career to build up this muscle to really be good at your chosen language domain. So maybe JavaScript, React, Python, C#, whatever. You need to be really good at this. But at a certain point, you'll need to move way beyond that because no one will care when you're a senior or a manager, how well you write a certain line of code. They're going to care how well do you understand larger problems. So it's a weird type of change that will happen later in your career. And I think that's why you see a lot of people on LinkedIn, especially saying this line, you're not paid to code, you're paid to solve problems. And not quite true. You are paid to code, quite literally, right? And you're also paid to solve problems. At some point, though, they flip. When you're a junior, you're pretty much paid more to code because that's literally what you're doing most of the day. You're paid to just produce lots of code. The more senior you get, the less code you're likely to produce, but the larger impact it will have. Anyway, when you see that written on LinkedIn, it's a common trope. I just want you to question that just for a little bit and think, really, are you? Here's a little trick I use, by the way, as a tangent. When I see people saying something, I like to take it to an extreme to see, does it make sense on one extreme or the other? And so if somebody says you're paid to solve problems, not to write code, what if you couldn't write code? Take it to an extreme. On one end of the spectrum is a person that can solve problems, but cannot code. So are they effective? Absolutely not. On the other end of the spectrum is a person that can code in every single language that ever existed, from COBOL to whatever came out last week in the JavaScript community, right? This person can't solve a problem. Are they effective? Absolutely not. So there's somewhere in the middle ground, right, that you are paid to do both, quite literally. So you need to start looking up how to do this at this point. If you can solve the problem through English, we've written out the English description. Now you might need to fill in some of the gaps because maybe you're not that good at coding yet. That's okay. So here's how I would do the search for this in using Google. I'd write my coding language like JavaScript plus the English description of the problem I'm trying to solve. For example, JavaScript plus how to check if an array includes a certain value. If we go back to our example, looking at in that array, and we say we're looking for a target of 9. I'm at the number 2. What number must I find? What number do I have to find? I have to find the number 7. How do I check to see if the array includes the number 7? If it does, then I'm done. But maybe I don't know how to do that. So I've written out in English, again, the problem I'm trying to solve, a sub-problem, and then I'm looking up how to actually do that. You could do that in ChatGPT, of course, as well, and you could probably get a pretty decent answer. I've found that ChatGPT can sometimes produce kind of weird results. I still like to use Google for things like that, but totally up to you and how you're prompt engineering and doing these kinds of things. Okay, step 4. We want to break the code before it breaks, right? Because happy path coding is the hallmark of the junior developer. It goes a little something like this. You write a function and you only test it with arguments that return what you expect, right? So assume your users have bad intentions and thumbs for fingers, and they just want to see you fail and embarrass you and ruin your code, right? So think about the edge cases or things that aren't immediately clear that could happen. Like what if the input grows by 10x? What if you have the number 5, like 4 times in an array, like 5, 5, 5, 5, and the target is 10? What do you return then? What if you have the numbers 1, 9, 2, and 8, and the target is 10? Well, now you could use 1 and 9 or 2 and 8. So which one do you use? If there's a human in the room and you're in an interview, you should just confirm your suspicions or make sure you understand the problem further and further clarify it and say, well, what happens if this happens? What if somebody passes in a string instead of a number? What if the array is empty? So at the very least, consider a few variations of the input you could receive. Now, here's where we get kind of tactical and practical. Here's what I would do. I'd create some sample inputs and write what I think the output will be next to them. And then I'd put a debugger in the code. A debugger, if you're using JavaScript or even if you're using other languages, is a way to pause execution of the code. So if you're using JavaScript and you're writing your code and you're running it in the browser, there is a debugger statement you can put in. You literally write debugger on a line where you want to pause execution, where the code will stop. And then you can hover over the code line by line and see what is happening. This is by far the best way to debug things if you're using JavaScript. If you're using another language, you can use print statements, console statements, whatever you want to use that makes sense to you. If you're using JavaScript and you just want to use console.log, be my freaking guest. But if you want to up your game, if you want to get to the next level of debuggery, then add a debugger. It's going to work really well. So run your code with the samples and see if you get the correct output. Did it work? Why? Did it not work? Why? Right? It's not enough to just say, now the code works, I'm done, right? So even when you're done, you're not done. Where's the fun in that? You're not done when you're done. That'd be silly. That's not how coding works at all. Here's step 5. You actually have a working solution at this point, or something that's approaching a working solution. What you need to do now is find out if you've leveraged a pattern that you didn't even know you leveraged. Nearly every problem you've encountered has been solved countless times over. If you're a junior developer or an early career developer, the problem you're solving has been solved 100 times over, no doubt. You don't need to reinvent the wheel here. It's important that you understand the pattern and you search for it so that way you know how to use it in the future. So you can use ChatGPT for something like this. This is an excellent tool to do this. You literally will paste your solution into your favorite AI tool and you say, hey, is there a name for this pattern? Or is there a better way to solve this using a common pattern? And I show this in the video that I did actually, where I did find a solution and then I dumped it into ChatGPT and it reminded me that I actually was using a common pattern that I actually wasn't aware of, which was really cool. I'm like, oh yeah, that is the pattern I'm using. I was like, what is this thing I'm doing here? I couldn't think of the name for it. It didn't just hit me. And then when I asked ChatGPT, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I'm like, oh, that's the pattern I'm using. And it wasn't immediately clear. Great way to make sure you're understanding or even just becoming aware that there are patterns, there are time-tested solutions to these things you're doing. Now, all this was easier said than done, right? If solving problems was simple, well, they wouldn't be problems, right? Pretty deep, right? If solving problems was easy, we just wouldn't have problems and you wouldn't get paid so handsomely to solve problems as a developer. That being said, this framework I've shared can work for you, but you need to mold it to create a strategy that makes sense for the problems that you are solving, the stuff that you are doing on a day-to-day basis, and see what makes sense, what doesn't, take away bits, put in bits, see things that kind of make sense. But if there's one thing I hope you got away from this, one big takeaway is that when you want to solve a coding problem, think through it, understand it, understanding how to solve a problem and thinking through it with some sort of pattern is at least as important as knowing how to write out the solution in a specific coding language. Really hope that's helpful. Again, check out the video and I hope you enjoy it and good luck. See you around. That'll do it for today's episode of the Develop Yourself podcast. If you're serious about switching careers and becoming a software developer and building complex software and want to work directly with me and my team, go to Parsity.io. And if you want more information, feel free to schedule a chat by just clicking the link in the show notes. See you next week.